Hello and welcome to The Broken Sword. Today we are having a look at who was the Mouth of Sauron.
Build me an army worthy of Mordor.
The Mouth of Sauron is the lieutenant of the Tower of Barad-dûr that we get to meet in the Return of the King section of The Lord of the Rings. In the book, the Mouth appears to meet and negotiate, or basically taunt, the men of the West when their army is marched to Mordor. In the Peter Jackson adaptation, the Mouth only appears in the extended edition before the Black Gate, and in this he is given the appearance of an eyeless man type being with an exaggerated mouth and large helm. Whereas in the 1980 Rankin Bass movie, he still has his eyes in this portrayal, even though they have still been more camouflaged into his helmet as well. But how does the book describe him? Well, this is the section from the Return of the King chapter of The Black Gate opens, where he makes his appearance. The door of the Black Gate was thrown open with a great clang, and out of it there came an embassy from the Dark Tower. At its head there rode a tall and evil shape, mounted upon a black horse, if horse it was, for it was huge and hideous, and its face was a frightful mask, more like a skull than a living head, and in the sockets of its eyes and in its nostrils there burned a flame. The rider was robed all in black, and black was his lofty helm. Yet this was no ringwraith, but a living man. The lieutenant of the Tower of Barad-dûr he was, and his name is remembered in no tale, for he himself had forgotten it, and he said,
I am the Mouth of Sauron.
But it is told that he was a renegade who came from the race of those that are named the Black Numenoreans, for they established their dwellings in Middle-earth during the years of Sauron's domination, and they worshipped him, being enamoured for evil knowledge, and he entered the service of the Dark Tower when it first rose again. And because of his cunning he grew ever higher in the Lord's favour, and he learned great sorcery and knew much of the mind of Sauron, and he was more cruel than any orc. This description paints a very solid picture of just what kind of being this man was. He had become dark through evil, could potentially be mistaken for a wraith, yet not having become one, and his cunning must have been great to rise to such a position in Sauron's favour. But even though his past has been forgotten, as it says, we can be pretty certain he was a Black Numenorean nonetheless. However, there is actually some debate around his origins, as I will go over now. We have two possible theories that have been discussed about him, and these both come from one sentence of the previous quote of, "And he entered the service of the Dark Tower when it first rose again." These two theories come from Robert Foster's The Complete Guide to Middle-earth book, which was first published in 1971, and it says under the Mouth of Sauron, "In the Third Age, and perhaps the Second as well, he served Sauron, rising in his service because of his cunning and evil. He became a great sorcerer, which is how he preserved his life for thousands of years. By the time of the War of the Ring, he had become the lieutenant of the Tower of Barad-dûr and had forgotten his real name. He was doubtless killed when Sauron fell, or in the battle with the army of the West which followed, also called the Messenger of Mordor." So if we actually look at Tolkien's writings now from Appendix B from The Lord of the Rings, we see that the Dark Tower arose for the first time at some point after either 3320 of the Second Age, or, if we count the rebuilding, its completion happened around the year 2951 of the Third Age. So some people can interpret this as the Mouth of Sauron lived in the Second Age from its original beginning, which would then in turn mean he would have been one of the king's men of Numenor, and so had probably prolonged his life with sorcery to be able to live for thousands of years. Or instead, he only had served Sauron for around 68 years, as what it really means is it's referencing the rebuilding of the tower in the Third Age instead. I personally feel that this second option is a much more feasible one, if anything just because of, if we look at the quote again, it does say, "And he entered the service of the Dark Tower when it first rose again," obviously meaning not the first time, And so, if this way is truly the case, then it means he would have actually been one of the Black Numenoreans who would come from either Umbar or Harad instead. Now obviously you will get people argue that perhaps the Dark Tower is maybe even referencing one of Morgoth's Dark Towers. But again, I don't really think so. I do think this is the rebuilding in the Third Age, but as I have to emphasize, this is just my personal opinion. You are by no means either right or wrong for thinking otherwise. But now, some of you may actually be wondering, what is a Black Numenorean? You may have heard of Numenor and the Men of Numenor, but not necessarily the Black Numenoreans as well. So, for those of you who are not completely sure of what this is, then let's have a quick run through and look back at the time of when the Kingdom of Numenor had not been sunk in the sea. Within this kingdom there was a group of high men who had succumbed to the Shadow, who would also go by the name of the King's Men, as quite obviously these were the men who supported the King of Numenor at that time. These were composed of the majority of the people living in Numenor by the late times of the Second Age, and they were those that believed in rebelling against the Valar and the Eldar because they had grown ever more envious of their immortality and hated them for having banned them from sailing so far west of their island that they could no longer see it. They were also oppressive in their ways of ruling and enjoyed acting as all-powerful overlords, and this was usually over the more primitive men of Middle-earth as they were easier to bring under their control. This is what led this group to surviving the downfall of Numenor, as there were large groups of them not on the island, but instead they were elsewhere attempting to gain control of other areas of Middle-earth. This meant that they survived throughout the Second Age and into the Third Age of Middle-earth, and although their lifespan was once as much as 3 times of that of the lesser men, as the years rolled on, they began to breed with these other so-called lesser men, and this caused their lifespans to reduce through the generations as a result. Although, that is not to say that there were none left with what they would have considered as a pure bloodline, but it is very unlikely that this is the case. And so it is from one of these that is most likely that the Mouth of Sauron would have descended from. So now that we have covered all that backstory and his origins, some of you may be wondering, what about his name? Does he really not actually have one? Well, again, if we look back at the quote from the beginning, it does say that his name is no longer known. He has become a different being to the man that he would have once been, meaning, as we say, his birth name was just lost. All his life turned into his new role as the Mouth of Sauron. However, in the earlier notes of Tolkien, it is said that he named this messenger of Sauron as Mordor, which when translated would mean Black Darkness. However, this name did not stick around for the final draft. But a strange point to go with this title of the Mouth of Sauron is it is also said by Aragorn in the Fellowship of the Ring chapter of The Departure of Boromir that Sauron does not use his right name, nor did he ever give permission for anyone to either spell or speak it. Yet this messenger called himself the Mouth of Sauron. So whether this was a title given to him by the Dark Lord or self-proclaimed, it is hard to know for sure. But what it does show that he was at the very least a large part of Sauron's plans and in his closer inner circle of his attempts at domination, also obviously shown by the fact that he was the one to come out and treaty with the men of the West. And so, the Mouth worshipped the Dark Lord to no end, being fascinated and driven to grow his evil knowledge in the name of Sauron. The Mouth is just a fascinating example of how Sauron could twist someone from what could have been a great man of Numenor into a vile and cruel person. This could be backed up even more when you look at the beast that he rode out on to meet with those at the Black Gate, as it was not simply just a horse he rode upon, but as it was described back in that quote again when he makes his first appearance. It says, "Mounted upon a black horse, if horse it was, for it was huge and hideous, and its face was a frightful mask, more like a skull than a living head. And in the sockets of its eyes and in its nostrils there burned a flame." It really would take a king of the likes of Aragorn alongside someone like Gandalf to really not be intimidated by such a thing marching towards them. Now, as for the Mouth of Sauron's day-to-day job, no one really knows what he does, as his only true appearance comes in the time of the War of the Ring. This is where we see him meet the army of the West, and when talking with them he would give his demands, or the demands of Sauron. One of these demands would include that upon their surrender a lieutenant of Sauron would be placed into Isengard, and in his head this surely would have been the Mouth of Sauron himself, although you have to also think it could have possibly been a Nazgul instead. But anyway, The Mouth would also attempt to intimidate Aragorn and Gandalf by showing them the mithril coat that belonged to Frodo, trying to make them believe that they had already retaken the One Ring. However, this would fail as they would not be intimidated. Thus, the Mouth of Sauron would decide that this was the time to send out all of the armies of Mordor in wait onto the Army of the West. Now, what about his end, you may ask? Did he die in battle? Did he act like a coward and run? Well, sadly it is not ever confirmed. However, it is all but certain that at this point the Mouth of Sauron would have died. It would have been either at some point on that day, whether during the assault or even while trying to run, but if not that, then surely not long afterwards, as he would not have gotten far when trying to flee. And so there we have it, a look at what we know about who and what the Mouth of Sauron truly was. We could be sure he came from the group known as the Black Numenoreans, and although there is some debate about if he was thousands of years old or maybe just 100 or so, I personally must side with the younger of these. He was a twisted and dark being, and in the end he suffered the fate he deserved. But now, as I approach the end of my video, I have my question for you all today, which is, how powerful do you think the Mouth of Sauron really was? If you think about it, both himself and Aragorn were some of the last descendants of the Men of Numenor, but would you consider them to be anywhere near as powerful as each other? After all, Aragorn was a king, and the Mouth of Sauron was just a servant. It may seem obvious, but I am curious to hear all of your thoughts and opinions on this in the comment section below. And now that we have reached the end of the video, I would also like to remind you all, we do not just have this channel, but we have two others as well, and they are the 6th Ranger if you enjoy your Power Rangers content, and the History of Dragon Ball if you enjoy your Dragon Ball content. Links for both of these channels will be in the description below if you would like to watch and support us on those as well. And now it is time to shout out our patrons. Firstly, our Divine Power team members of Kevin, Michael, Abram, Matt and Glorfindel of Gondolin. You are all awesome. And a big thank you to our Fire Demon tier members of Nashith, Lorenzo, Denver Steel and Gregory. And as well, I cannot forget the Wizard Staff tier member of Andrew to go with them. You are all true legends of the Brohirrim. And finally, if you have not already, please do all that great stuff. Hit the like button on the video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the channel if you want to keep up to date with everything that we upload. Remember, hit that bell icon as well, as we've been having a lot of issues at the moment with YouTube not notifying people of our videos when they go up. So I will also say here, our upload schedule at this time, Mondays at 1 o'clock British time and Thursdays at 1 o'clock British time as well. So if you don't get a notification that there is a video up after those times, check out the channel anyway. So thank you once more if you have managed to reach the end of this video with me today, and we will see you next time on The Broken Sword.